Lawrence Siemens was sitting alone at a fancy wedding reception, enjoying his first cup of Earl Grey tea in months, when an elegant older woman in a black lace dress sat down next to him and whispered desperately, "Please, I need you to pretend my daughter is yours, just for tonight." Before Lawrence could refuse, she pulled him across the ballroom toward a beautiful woman in a white dress who was being cornered by a wealthy businessman. Lawrence had no idea that agreeing to this one lie would lead him to discover that everything he thought he knew about his life was wrong, that the woman he'd fallen in love with was a billionaire CEO, and that he himself was secretly the heir to a fortune he never knew existed. Before we continue, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Seeing how far our stories travel reminds us that meaningful storytelling knows no borders. The woman introduced herself as Jennifer Hartwell, and she explained everything to Lawrence as they walked across the ballroom. Her daughter Rebecca was being pressured by the family to marry Marcus Pemberton, a wealthy businessman who only wanted Rebecca for her money and connections. The family supported the match because they thought Rebecca needed a husband to help her run the family business. Jennifer had chosen Lawrence because he looked kind and real, and she thought Rebecca needed someone genuine for once in her life, even if it was just pretend. Lawrence wanted to refuse, but something about Jennifer's desperation reminded him of his own struggles as a single father, so he agreed to help. When they reached Rebecca, Jennifer loudly announced that she'd finally met the man who had stolen her daughter's heart. Rebecca looked shocked at first, but then she seemed to understand what her mother was doing, and she played along. She called Lawrence by name. Jennifer had whispered it to her, and thanked him for coming. Marcus Pemberton appeared immediately and asked who Lawrence was. Rebecca introduced Lawrence as her boyfriend, which clearly shocked Marcus. He asked what Lawrence did for a living, and Lawrence told him he worked in logistics, which was technically true since he drove delivery trucks for Meridian Logistics. Marcus dismissed Lawrence as beneath their social class and walked away angry. After Marcus left, Rebecca apologized to Lawrence for her mother's scheme. She explained that she'd been dealing with her family's pressure to marry someone wealthy for 2 years, ever since her father died, and she took over the company. Lawrence told her it was okay and asked if she was all right. Rebecca said she was better now than she'd been in months, because Lawrence had given her a way to breathe. Jennifer returned with champagne and suggested they dance so people would believe the lie. Lawrence admitted he wasn't a good dancer, and Rebecca said she wasn't either. So they went to the dance floor together. As they danced, they talked about their lives. Rebecca explained how her family thought she needed a man to steady her and keep her from making reckless decisions with the company. Lawrence told her about his daughter Mia, who was 7 years old and staying with a neighbor that night. He explained that his wife Sarah had died of cancer 3 years ago, and he'd been raising Mia alone while working as a truck driver. Rebecca asked if they could keep pretending for the rest of the night, not for her family but for herself, because she just wanted one evening where she could feel normal and not like a CEO or an heir or a piece of property. Lawrence agreed because he could see how exhausted and lonely she was, and because holding her felt surprisingly natural despite the absurdity of the situation. They spent the rest of the evening together, eating dinner at a corner table away from Rebecca's family and talking about everything. Lawrence told her about Mia's obsession with dinosaurs and how much he still missed Sarah sometimes. Rebecca talked about her father and how he'd built his company from nothing, but never realized how lonely it would be for her to take it over. They both realized that being a single parent and being a lonely CEO had more in common than they'd expected. Both roles were isolating and exhausting. Around 11 o'clock, Rebecca's Uncle Richard tried to interrupt them to discuss business, but Rebecca firmly told him no. He made a snide comment about Lawrence not being appropriate for Rebecca, but she shut him down coldly. After he left, Rebecca told Lawrence her family was awful, and he agreed. They left the reception shortly after midnight. Rebecca had taken a car service to the venue, so Lawrence offered to drive her home. He warned her that his vehicle wasn't fancy, and when they reached his 10-year-old Ford F-150 truck with a Meridian Logistics logo on the side, Rebecca said it was perfect. She climbed in without complaining about the fast food wrappers or the child's car seat in the back. Lawrence drove her to an expensive neighborhood where the houses were massive and set behind gates. When they arrived at her house, they sat in the truck talking, and both of them admitted that the evening hadn't felt like pretending at all. Then Rebecca kissed him, and it was desperate and real, and when they finally pulled apart, She asked him to come inside. Lawrence said he couldn't because he needed to get home to Mia, but he agreed when Rebecca asked if they could see each other again. Lawrence drove home, feeling like his entire world had shifted. Everything in his apartment was exactly the same. The dishes in the sink, Mia's toys on the floor, the bills on the counter. But he felt completely different. He lay in bed thinking about Rebecca and telling himself that tomorrow he would call her and explain that they came from different worlds and this couldn't work. But when tomorrow came, he called her just to say good morning, and she sounded so happy to hear from him that he forgot all his planned reasons for ending things. That was how Lawrence, a single father and truck driver, started dating Rebecca Hartwell, and for 3 wonderful weeks, he was happier than he'd been since Sarah died. For the next 3 weeks, Lawrence and Rebecca kept their relationship quiet. Rebecca said it was because she didn't want her family interfering, and Lawrence agreed because he didn't want people asking why someone like her would date someone like him. They went to restaurants on the other side of the city where nobody would recognize her. They took Mia to the park, and Rebecca pushed her on the swings and didn't mind when Mia got ice cream on her expensive clothes. They spent evenings at Lawrence's small apartment watching Disney movies with Mia. Lawrence noticed that Rebecca never invited him to her mansion again, and he tried not to think about what that meant. Mia fell in love with Rebecca, which both thrilled and terrified Lawrence because his daughter had barely known her mother and was already getting attached to this new woman. When Mia asked if Rebecca was going to be her new mommy, Lawrence had to tell her he didn't know. At work, nobody knew anything had changed in Lawrence's life, except that he smiled more. He continued driving his routes, delivering packages and filing paperwork. His supervisor commented that he seemed happier, but Lawrence just shrugged. Rebecca told him she worked in business consulting, which was vague, but Lawrence figured she was embarrassed about the wealth gap between them and appreciated that she was trying to make him feel less inadequate. Everything fell apart on a Monday morning during the 4th week. Lawrence was loading his truck at the warehouse when a younger driver named Tyler was watching something on his phone and talking about a CEO who was only 36 but worth $75 million. The driver was reading about how the CEO was secretly dating some regular guy, and her family thought he was a gold digger. Lawrence asked who the CEO was, and Tyler looked at his phone and said Rebecca Hartwell, who ran Hartwell Industries. Lawrence felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. His Rebecca worked in business consulting. His Rebecca ate takeout Chinese food on his second-hand couch. His Rebecca had been lying to him for 3 weeks. Lawrence went outside and called her immediately. When she answered sounding happy, he asked if she was Rebecca Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries. There was a long pause, and then she asked who told him. He asked if she'd ever planned to tell him, or if she was just going to keep lying. She tried to explain that she hadn't lied. She just hadn't told him everything, and she'd known he would react exactly like this. He'd think she was too good for him. Lawrence told her she was worth $75 million while he drove a truck, probably for a company, and asked if she realized how insane that was. She said she didn't care about money, but he said he did because people were calling him a gold digger when he hadn't even known there was gold to dig for. He also said the worst part was that Mia was already attached to her, and when Rebecca got bored of pretending to be poor and went back to her real life, his daughter would be heartbroken. Rebecca said she would never hurt Mia and that she loved both of them. Lawrence said she didn't even know the real him, just some version she'd been pretending he was. He told her he was just a guy who drove trucks and lived paycheck to paycheck and couldn't afford to take his daughter to Disneyland. And that was who he really was. When Rebecca tried to argue, he said he'd actually thought their relationship was real, but it had just been another performance like the night at the wedding. Then he hung up. Rebecca called back repeatedly, but Lawrence declined the calls and eventually turned off his phone. By the time he got home that evening, he had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages from her. He deleted them all without reading them. He picked up Mia from his neighbor Mrs. Chun, made dinner, helped with homework, and read bedtime stories, and the whole time his heart felt like it was being crushed. When Mia asked why he looked sad, Lawrence told her he wasn't, but she said his eyes looked like they had when her mother was sick. That night, someone knocked on Lawrence's door, and he knew it was Rebecca before he looked through the peephole. She was still in her work clothes, an expensive designer suit, and her eyes were red from crying. Through the door, Lawrence told her to go away. She begged him to let her explain, but he said there was nothing to explain. She told him she loved him, which hurt Lawrence badly because he wanted it to be true. But he said she didn't love him. She loved the idea of him, the fantasy of being with someone real. But he was a real person with a real daughter who couldn't afford to get hurt. Rebecca said she would never hurt them, but Lawrence said it was already happening. They were already over. They had been over since her mother dragged him across that ballroom. He just hadn't known it yet. Then Rebecca said something strange. She told him there was more to the story than he knew, and that her mother hadn't found him by accident, and that the whole thing, meeting him, falling for him, wasn't random. Lawrence asked what she meant, and she said she just needed him to let her in so she could explain everything, that he deserved to know the truth. Lawrence almost opened the door because he was curious, but then he thought about Mia sleeping in the next room and the life he'd carefully built after Sarah's death, and how easily Rebecca could destroy it all without meaning to. So he told her no, he didn't want to know, he just wanted her to leave. He heard her standing there for a long time before her footsteps finally walked away. Then Lawrence slid down to the floor with his back against the door and cried for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Lawrence didn't call Rebecca for the next week. He threw himself into work and taking care of Mia, trying hard not to think about the woman who had made him feel alive for the first time in 3 years. Mia asked about Miss Rebecca for a few days, but Lawrence just said she was busy with work, and eventually Mia stopped asking, though she still looked sad. A week after he'd sent Rebecca away, Lawrence came home from work to find Jennifer Hartwell sitting on the stairs outside his apartment building. She looked tired and more human than she had at the wedding. Lawrence told her she needed to leave, but Jennifer said she would. But first he needed to hear what she had to say. Then Jennifer told him something shocking. She'd been following him for 6 months. She'd been watching him, learning about his routines, his daughter, his work, everything. Lawrence said that was insane and basically stalking, but Jennifer said it was desperation. She asked if he wanted to know why, and even though Lawrence knew he should walk away, something made him stop and listen. Jennifer explained that her daughter was dying, not physically, but dying nonetheless. Rebecca was 36 and had been running her father's company since she was 34, and the pressure and scrutiny and constant circling of vultures waiting for her to fail was destroying her. Rebecca hadn't had a real relationship in 8 years because every man who approached her wanted her money or connections or her body. Jennifer had watched her daughter turn into a shell of herself, working 18-hour days and going to bed alone in her enormous house. Lawrence said this wasn't his problem, but Jennifer continued. She said that 6 months ago, she decided to find Rebecca someone real, someone who would see her as a person, not a bank account, someone who understood hard work and loss and unconditional love. So Jennifer had looked, and one day while having lunch near Meridian Logistics, she'd seen Lawrence with Mia at a cafe. Mia had spilled juice on herself, and Lawrence had just laughed and cleaned her up and bought her another one without getting angry or impatient. Jennifer said she saw kindness in that moment, so she started researching Lawrence. Lawrence said that was creepy, but Jennifer called it thorough. She explained that she'd learned about Sarah's death, about how Lawrence raised Mia alone, about how he worked himself half to death to give his daughter a good life. She learned he volunteered at Mia's school and donated to the food bank, even though he could barely afford it. Jennifer said Lawrence was exactly the kind of man Rebecca needed. Lawrence realized she'd engineered their meeting at the gala. Jennifer confirmed it. She bought the charity gala ticket and put it in his mailbox with a note saying he'd won a raffle. She knew he'd go because the note mentioned children's cancer research, and she knew he'd want to honor Sarah's memory. She'd approached him at the gala because she knew he was the kind of man who helped people, and she'd been right. Lawrence had helped Rebecca, and something real had grown from it. Lawrence shouted that nothing about it was real because Jennifer had manipulated both of them. Jennifer said she'd given them an opportunity, and what happened after that first night was entirely real. Rebecca had fallen in love with Lawrence, and he'd fallen in love with her too. Lawrence said that didn't make what Jennifer did okay, and she agreed. She said what she'd done was wrong, and she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted Lawrence to hear the whole truth before making his decision. Then Jennifer pulled out a manila folder and asked if Lawrence knew much about his late wife's family. Lawrence said not much. Sarah didn't talk about them because they disapproved of their marriage and thought she was marrying beneath her station. Jennifer told him Sarah's maiden name was Meridian, as in Meridian Logistics. Lawrence felt the world shift. Jennifer explained that Sarah's grandfather had founded Meridian Logistics in 1952, and when he died, the company passed his son, Sarah's father, who had cut Sarah out of his will when she married Lawrence because he thought Lawrence was a gold digger. Lawrence whispered that he'd never wanted Sarah's money, and Jennifer said she knew that. Then Jennifer explained something Lawrence didn't know. Sarah's father had died 18 months ago, and because Sarah had already passed away and because she had a daughter, the inheritance hadn't disappeared. It had gone into a trust for Mia, managed by lawyers who'd been trying to find Lawrence for over a year. Jennifer handed him the folder, and Lawrence opened it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents showing that Mia was the sole heir to the Meridian fortune, which meant Lawrence, as her guardian, was responsible for managing it until she turned 18. This effectively made Lawrence the owner of Meridian Logistics, the company he'd been driving trucks for, the company worth an estimated $45 million. Jennifer told him he wasn't a truck driver. He was one of the richest men in the city. He just hadn't known it yet. The lawyers had been trying to reach him, but he'd moved twice since Sarah died and changed his phone number, so they'd only recently tracked him down. They'd been waiting for final paperwork to clear before contacting him, which was why Jennifer had approached him when she did. She knew his world was about to change. Lawrence asked why she would do this, and Jennifer explained that she needed him to fall in love with Rebecca before he knew about the money. She needed him to see Rebecca as a person, not an opportunity, and she needed Rebecca to see him the same way. If Jennifer had waited until after Lawrence found out about his inheritance, he would have wondered if Rebecca only wanted him for his money, and Rebecca would have wondered if he only wanted her because he could finally afford her. Lawrence looked at the documents, proving his whole life was a lie. Everything he believed about himself, that he was a struggling single father, a working-class truck driver, was based on false information. Jennifer said she knew he was angry and had every right to be, but she'd done it because she loved her daughter and could see she was dying inside. Jennifer had seen in Lawrence the kind of man who could save Rebecca with genuine love, not money. She just needed to give them both a chance to find each other. Lawrence told Jennifer to get out and take her folder and her manipulations and her daughter and stay away from him and Mia forever. Jennifer stood up slowly and said she hoped someday he'd understand why she'd done this. Lawrence said he'd never understand because he would never do something like this, no matter how desperate he was. As Jennifer left, she turned back and told Lawrence one more thing. Rebecca didn't know about any of this. She didn't know Jennifer had researched him or engineered their meeting. Rebecca just knew she loved Lawrence, and that was the only real thing in this entire mess. Jennifer asked him to remember that, whatever he decided to do. After she left, Lawrence put Mia to bed and then sat at his kitchen table reading every document in the folder. It took until 3 in the morning. By the time he finished, he knew the truth. He'd never been poor. He'd been working as a truck driver for a company he actually owned, living in a tiny apartment when he could have afforded a mansion, struggling to pay bills when he had $45 million waiting for him. His entire identity had been built around being the struggling single father, the hard-working everyman, and it was all based on a lie. The worst part was realizing Jennifer had been right about one thing. If he'd known about the money before meeting Rebecca, everything would have been tainted. He would have always wondered if she wanted him or his fortune, and she would have wondered the same about him. Lawrence put his head on the table and tried to figure out what to do. Lawrence called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. He spent the day on the phone with lawyers who confirmed everything in Jennifer's folder. The trust was real, the inheritance was real, and Lawrence and Mia were wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined. The lead lawyer said they needed Lawrence to come in and sign documents, and they should discuss a transition plan for his role at Meridian Logistics. The current CEO had been running things temporarily, but as the owner, Lawrence would need to be involved in major decisions at minimum, and most people in his position chose to take an active management role. Lawrence asked if that meant he'd actually have to run the company, and the lawyer sounded confused because Lawrence was the owner, so yes, he'd need to be involved. Lawrence hung up and stared at the wall, feeling lost. He'd spent 3 years defining himself as a truck driver, as a working-class single dad, and the idea of becoming a CEO made him feel like he was losing himself. But giving up Mia's inheritance just because it made him uncomfortable seemed selfish and stupid. While he was trying to figure out what to do, someone knocked on his door. It was Rebecca, looking terrible. Her hair was in a messy bun. She wore jeans and an old sweatshirt, and her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked more beautiful than ever. Before Lawrence could close the door, Rebecca said she needed to tell him something. Lawrence said her mother had already told him everything, about the setup, about how Jennifer had engineered their meeting, about how none of it was real. Rebecca looked shocked and said she didn't know about any of that. Her mother had never told her she'd been researching Lawrence or that she'd planned their meeting. Rebecca had thought it was just luck or fate. Lawrence asked if it mattered since either way. They were from different worlds. Rebecca said no, they weren't. He was worth $45 million. Lawrence froze and asked how she knew. Rebecca explained that his lawyers had called her mother looking for a character reference, and Jennifer had told Rebecca everything that morning about Sarah's family, the trust, Meridian Logistics, all of it. Lawrence slumped against the doorframe and said, so now she knew. The truck driver wasn't really a truck driver. He was just another rich person who'd been too stupid to realize it. Rebecca said he wasn't stupid. He was grieving. He'd lost his wife and been trying to survive, and he hadn't had time to deal with lawyers and inheritance and family drama. She said she understood. Lawrence asked if she really understood, because he didn't. A month ago, he'd known exactly who he was, and now he didn't know anything. Rebecca said she knew who he was. He was a man who'd helped a stranger to party, the father who worked himself to exhaustion for his daughter, the person who made her feel safe and seen and loved. That was who Lawrence was, not his bank account. Lawrence said the bank account changed everything, because now he could afford to date her. Now they were equals. Rebecca shook her head and said she'd never cared about that. She'd fallen in love with a man who drove a beat-up truck and lived in a tiny apartment. That was the man she wanted. Lawrence said that man didn't exist. He'd been a lie. Rebecca insisted he wasn't a lie. He was Lawrence dealing with circumstances he didn't fully understand, and he was still that person even though the circumstances had changed. Lawrence wanted desperately to believe her. Rebecca said her mother had been wrong to manipulate them, and she was furious with Jennifer. But her mother had been right about one thing. What Lawrence and Rebecca found together was real. Rebecca loved Lawrence, not his money, not his potential, just him. Lawrence whispered that he loved her too, which was what made this so hard. Rebecca stepped closer and told him not to make it hard, not to push her away because he was scared or confused. She wanted to help him figure everything out. Lawrence asked what he couldn't be who she needed him to be, and Rebecca said he already was. Then Lawrence said something he'd been thinking. He didn't want to be a CEO. Rebecca blinked and said okay. Lawrence said he meant it. He knew he owned Meridian Logistics now, or Mia did, but he didn't want to run it. He didn't want to wear suits and go to board meetings and play games with people like Marcus Pemberton. Rebecca said simply, so don't. She told him to hire someone to run the company, keep the current CEO if they were good, or find someone new. He could set up a trust that managed everything until Mia was old enough to decide what she wanted. She said having money didn't mean he had to become a different person. Lawrence asked about her. She was a CEO. She lived in that world. Rebecca said she hated that world. She was good at it, but she hated it. She told him what she really wanted to do. Step back from day-to-day operations and focus on foundation work. The charity stuff her father had started before he died. She wanted to work with nonprofits and help people instead of making rich people richer. But she couldn't do that while trying to prove to her board and family that a woman could run a company without a man. Lawrence said they were both trapped, and Rebecca countered that they were both ready for a change. Lawrence thought about the possibilities. He could keep driving trucks just for the love of it, or do something entirely different. He could secure Mia's future and still live authentically, and he could do it all with Rebecca. Lawrence said he was still mad at her mother. Rebecca said she was too, and they could be mad at her together. He said he'd need time to figure everything out, and Rebecca said she'd give him all the time he needed. He warned her he'd make mistakes and be confused and scared, and Rebecca said she'd be confused and scared right along with him. Finally, Lawrence opened the door all the way, and Rebecca stepped inside. He pulled her into his arms, and she fit perfectly, just like that first night at the wedding. Rebecca whispered that she was glad her mother had been a manipulative schemer because it brought them together. Lawrence said not to let Jennifer hear that, or she'd never let them forget it. From her bedroom, Mia called out sleepily asking if Miss Rebecca was there. Lawrence and Rebecca looked at each other, and Lawrence called back that yes, she was there. Mia asked if she was staying, and Rebecca smiled and called back that yes, she was staying. And she did stay, not that night, but in their lives. She was there the next day when Lawrence met with lawyers. She was there the week after when he officially took ownership of Meridian Logistics and promptly hired a management company to run it while he figured out what he wanted. She was there 2 months later when Lawrence confronted Jennifer, and surprisingly, Rebecca was the one who stopped Lawrence from saying all his angry thoughts. Rebecca told him her mother had been wrong, but also right, and sometimes people who love us do wrong things for right reasons. Lawrence didn't forgive Jennifer that day, but he didn't cut her out either, because she was Mia's grandmother and genuinely loved her daughter. Rebecca was there 6 months later, when Lawrence took a job coordinating logistics for Rebecca's foundation, helping get supplies to people who needed them. It turned out he was good at it and loved it. She was there a year later when Lawrence sold his apartment and bought a house. Not a mansion, but a real house with a yard where Mia could play, in a normal neighborhood where neighbors borrowed sugar and kids rode bikes in the street. And she was there 18 months after that wedding when Lawrence proposed to her. They got married in a small ceremony in their backyard with Mia as the flower girl, and Jennifer crying in the front row and Mrs. Chun complaining loudly that she'd known all along they were perfect for each other. Marcus Pemberton was not invited on their wedding night. After Mia was asleep and the guests had left, Lawrence and Rebecca sat on their porch drinking champagne from cheap plastic cups. Lawrence asked if she ever thought about how insane their story was, and Rebecca said all the time. He asked if she was happy, and she said deliriously. When he said me too, he meant it completely, because it turned out that having money didn't change who you were. It just gave you more choices about the life you wanted to live. And Lawrence had chosen a normal house in a normal neighborhood with the woman he loved and the daughter who was his whole world. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was real, and that made it perfect. This story teaches us that our worth as human beings is not determined by our bank account, job title, or social status, but by our character, kindness, and capacity to love. Lawrence's insecurity about not being enough for Rebecca nearly destroyed their relationship, showing how deeply society's obsession with wealth and status can wound us and make us doubt our own value. The double twist reveals that while Jennifer's manipulation was wrong, it forced both Lawrence and Rebecca to see past external circumstances and recognize authentic love, something neither money nor poverty can create or destroy. The real lesson is about authenticity. Lawrence found happiness not by becoming wealthy or poor, but by choosing to live according to his own values rather than society's expectations, proving that a meaningful life comes from being true to yourself, treating others with genuine respect and love, and understanding that financial circumstances change, but character endures. Most importantly, the story reminds us that love based on who someone truly is, their kindness, their struggles, their realness, will always be stronger than love based on what they have or what they can provide. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person, Dot. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?